That smell in the air, it's not fresh baked cookies. It is in fact the season of Ryzen 5000, or Threadripper 5000 I should say. Ryzen Threadripper 5000. That's what's coming. I've already messed up, but I've got some catching up to do because the new CPUs are going to continue to work in the old WRX80 motherboard. And that actually means a lot, because yes, you will be able to use a Threadripper 5000 CPU in a Threadripper 3000 WRX80 motherboard. It's been almost 2 years, and a lot of people have been really enjoying their Threadripper workstations. In fact, it's been kind of a bizarre situation because we've seen a couple of system builders, system integrators, stop carrying Threadripper 3000 because they were basically unobtainium. Presumably, AMD was selling all of those chips in the Epic market, or the chips were all so good that there weren't enough leftover chips to dump into Threadripper CPUs or something. I think it was probably supply chain, in all honesty, because I ordered this in February of 2021. What? Yes. Yeah, the Supermicro WRX80 motherboard, this very one, I had ordered from Newegg in February. And by August, the order was canceled. And finally, after quite a lot of salt on my part, I was like, okay, the 5000 series CPUs are here. We're gonna order this. So I'm catching up. This is really gonna be with a Threadripper 3000 CPU. In this case, I've got a 16-core Threadripper Pro. I'm gonna probably go to Gamers Nexus in a month or two for a visit. 3 months, something like that. And I'm thinking about a storage server upgrade for them because, oh gosh, their little Silverstone with its plucky little small number of cores and not enough PCIe connectivity, it's done all right. The time's come. This motherboard from Supermicro could make a good workstation. It could make a good server. It could make a good workstation. AMD announced some surprises with their 5000 series CPUs. One of them was overclocking. And so what that means is that there's actually going to be a refresh of WRX80 motherboards. So while I can use a 5000 series CPU in ye olde Supermicro motherboard, I am not likely to be able to use PBO or other overclocking on this motherboard. I have the Asus WRX80. Nope. Doesn't seem, I mean, the Asus Sage WRX80 has an overbuilt VRM. I did a video on it, a separate build. Still use it every day. We were using it for the Linux FSR testing for games that don't support FSR. You can lie to them now, thanks to Glorious Eggroll and his fork of Proton. So yay, good job, Glorious Eggroll. Anyway, again, rambling. I also have the Gigabyte WRX80 motherboard. Gigabyte does have a refresh coming. Got one of those motherboards on the way, so there's going to be some refresh here. I know that Asus has the Extreme Alpha motherboard. I really want to do a WRX80 motherboard roundup. But this is one of the older generation motherboards, and on paper, and in actuality, it's pretty well built. Other than if you buy an older WRX80 motherboard, I would say don't count on PBO working. Supermicro and their model numbers. This is the MBD M12SWA-TF. Woo! They issue literally everything that they don't absolutely need, including fancy VRM nonsense. 1, 2, 3, 4. As we can see here, it's a 3+12 VRM configuration. It's modest. It's designed to operate the CPU at up to 280 watts. As yet, with the BIOS update for this board that I think has already been updated for Threadripper Pro 5000 on the Supermicro website as of July 1, it looks like this motherboard is not going to enable PBO. It does support CTDP. I've got a Threadripper Pro CPU in here that has some CTDP options. You can tell it to use a little bit more power than the default, and it will, but it's still not going to use more than 280 watts. But you can set those things in the BIOS. We do have some fins on the heat sinks. Unfortunately, the fins are pointed the wrong way for airflow like this across the motherboard. Except for these are pointed correctly, just not these at the front. Why? This motherboard has 6 x16 PCIe slots, and every single one of them is 16 lanes because Threadripper is absolutely bananas when it comes to PCI Express lanes. We also have 8 memory channels and 8 memory slots, so this thing can rock up to 2 terabytes of memory. 1 terabyte of memory if it's, commodity available. 2 terabytes is still pretty hard to come by in that density. On board we have 4 NVMe plus 2 slim SAS breakouts for 4 SATA plus 4 onboard SATA. We have onboard USB Type-C, which is always nice to see, and a single 30-pin USB header. There are 2 8-pin power adapters, so theoretically this motherboard could demand more than 400 watts, which is what a single 8-pin can provide for the CPU. And that does sound like it would promise some overclocking, but unfortunately, I didn't really see that. I also think it's really, really funny that there's actually a third 8-pin connector here, and Supermicro didn't bother making up new stickers because it's like, oh, do you actually need both? Supermicro doesn't bother with pleb tier hardware. It's always like the good server stuff, but both 8 pins required for heavy load configuration. Both. There's 3 of them. This one is, of course, for PCI Express. So if you have a lot of GPUs here, they're going to demand 75 watts through the slot. And if you don't connect this, then your system is going to be unstable. Over the years, we've had several people post in the Level 1 forums, and I really have gotten to Dr. House it up when they show up with this elaborate write-up and an elaborate set of symptoms, and it's like, this is my motherboard, and here's some pictures. And it's like your stability issues because you didn't plug in this weird, funky little power connector on the front edge of your motherboard. And they're like, what? What? Yeah, you've got 2 things that need a lot of power. You need to plug that in. Oh, okay. And I plug it in, and the stability issues are gone. Thanks, Dr. House. The other thing I like about Supermicro is they're used to building server boards, so they did not skimp on the number of 4-pin fan headers. We have 4 here, 2 more here at the top, 3 at the back. That's going to cover you no matter what you want to do in terms of 4-pin fan headers. We also have the system management bus for the power supply. So if you want to get a server grade power supply, such as those from FSP Group that I've reviewed, that have the system management bus header, you can do that. You can connect it right here to the header on the motherboard and you're good to go. Now this motherboard is a big chunky motherboard. It's not a standard ATX motherboard. It is wide, not tall. So you don't need an 8 expansion slot case, but you do need a case that will support extended ATX up to the full width of this thing, which is not going to be very many desktop cases. Supermicro has also opted for a 3-pin chipset fan header here at the front edge. I know that'll drive some of you absolutely insane. Some of you might not even choose to buy the motherboard because of the presence of this fan. But pretty much all the other WRX80 motherboards have a fan, even the ones where pretty much the entire motherboard is heatsink. So there's going to be a fan there. You might just not notice it immediately, at least on last gen WRX80. Maybe the new crop is going to be different, but kind of doubt it. This is a standard heatsink form factor, so you can actually get these on eBay and elsewhere online. It's not really, doesn't seem to be made bespoke for this motherboard, which is maybe good in terms of maintenance and future replacements. Again, Supermicro's been there, done that, so they like to standardize on things to the nth degree. The chipset fan was surprisingly loud at defaults, but it was possible to use the IPMI to configure the chipset fan to run at a lower, more reasonable speed for a server. That's one of the oversights I've been seeing with these Threadripper Pro motherboards, is that when you're talking about using it in a workstation capacity, people care about those kind of things. And I think that a better solution than this is possible. So look for that on WRX80 refresh motherboards, because remember, this design is from a year ago. It doesn't mean it's not good. It's actually really good. Just a minor annoyance. Now, so there are some very important things to keep in mind about this type of motherboard if you're contemplating a workstation build, you're upgrading from something, and that is, this has onboard remote management via the onboard ASpeed 2600 controller. It's got onboard VGA. That means you can do remote control. When you leave the onboard VGA, the onboard remote management turned on, you can remote into this thing over the network and control it. Supermicro has opted to do a couple of things a little different than server motherboards, probably to save on cost. The first is you'll notice there's two NICs back here. One is based on a Quantia 10 gig chipset, and the other one is based on an Intel 1 gig chipset. The Intel 1 gig chipset is shared with the A-Speed IPMI. You see, you can have a separate physical wired connection, or your IPMI, believe it or not, there's a feature in the Intel NICs that will let it hijack the Intel connection and actually share the physical NIC with the operating system. So there's one physical NIC, but this thing will work even when the computer is off for remote control and anything, and that goes through the 1 gig port. The 10 gig port is separate. So even though you don't see a dedicated IPMI port back here, it can be remotely managed, and it is the full feature set of the A-Speed 2600, and that's really awesome. That reminds me, the box does include the I/O shield, along with a few other accessories. You got 4 SATA cables, a bunch of M.2 mounting screws, which is nice because they all share one plastic bag. Yay! Supermicro knows that you don't have 3 CPU power connectors, so they include this handy little adapter that will go from GPU 12 volt power to CPU 12 volt power. So plug in number 3, Supermicro got you covered. Good job, Supermicro, including that, because even the 1200 watt power supplies don't have 3 CPU power connectors. Servers do, though. If you're building a server, it's totally normal for a server to have a bunch more of the CPU style EPS 12 volt wires. The reason for that is because they'll carry 400 watts. The GPU version is not guaranteed to carry 400 watts. And of course, you know, the industry couldn't bother to use EPS 12 volt. They had to invent a new connector that uses smaller pins and more of them, because that's just how gamer stuff does it. But in server land, well, servers. For a motherboard like this is actually a surprisingly complete accessory kit. The PCB revision here is labeled 1.01, but I suspect it's even a little bit newer than 1.01 because they don't always update the point revision there. And then of course I've got my 3000 series, not 5000 series Threadripper Pro CPU to install, because anything else would be under embargo. I don't have anything, but if I did, could talk about it anyway. Yeah, so look for other stuff on the channel if you're watching this in the future. There's a fair number of peripherals on the back, but you know, there's nothing in terms of like heat shield or heat dissipation or anything like that. You're definitely going to want to use a case that has loads of airflow. My top recommendation for that is probably the Fractal Torrent, because I've used physical actual server motherboards and the Fractal Torrent that have a modest cooling situation for their VRMs, because servers usually have a lot more airflow than desktop computers. And the Torrent did a good job with those server class motherboards, even under extreme conditions, dual EPIC processor type conditions. You only got a single one here. Even if you're doing overclocking, it's not going to use that much power. So I've got a Norco 4224 case here that we're going to put this in. The Fractal Pop Air XL, it's not going to work in that. I tried it. I'm going to try it in some other cases. Have to do that in a future video. In fact, our Norco 4222, you actually would be better off mounting the fan. There's a fan plate in the middle of the case. There's 2 sets of screw holes. It would be better if you moved it closer to the front, because you have no room at the front edge of the motherboard. There's no clearance for anything. So the 4 SATA ports and your U.2 ports are blocked if you deploy this motherboard in the Norco 4224. It's just not going to work. Well, it'll work, but yeah, not great. Speaking of which, let's talk physical installation. So if you want to use this motherboard from Supermicro in the Norco 4224 with the Arctic SP3-4U cooler, it is possible. There is 0 millimeters of extra clearance. The standoff height of this case, from the bottom of the case to the top of the standoff, is 10.5 millimeters, give or take. Give or take 0.1 millimeters. The thickness of this motherboard to the top of the Threadripper Pro IHS is about 12.6 millimeters, and then our SP3 is about 152-ish millimeters tall. Some of the heat pipes on the top stick up just a little bit more, like a millimeter or so, more than the others. However, it fits in this case fine. You can put the top on it. Nothing is being stressed by that. It's just that there is no clearance. There's no extra clearance. It fits perfectly. And this is a very, very good cooler when we're talking about Threadripper Pro or EPIC with 280 watts of power dissipation. Very, very good. This motherboard also has the I2 interface, the I2C interface for smart power supplies. So if you elect to get something like the FSP group server power supply that fits in an ATX form factor that also has the I2 interface, you can do that. Or if you're repurposing an old, dual redundant server power supply or something like that, you can connect the I2, the system management bus, to the header here, and the Supermicro onboard management knows what to do with that. It'll work fine. You can also use Supermicro's power supplies, which probably came from, well, you can use Supermicro's chassis and power supplies and that sort of thing, and it'll also plug in and be basically plug and play. This is a very, very good workstation class motherboard, and it's also, I'm sure, going to be very interesting and very eye-opening for Supermicro dealing with customers and end users, or working with their OEMs who are dealing with more customers and end users that are more on the workstation side of things. Supermicro is no stranger to making workstations, that's true, but with AMD involved and Threadripper Pro and what the 3000 series has been so far, it is a little bit of a Wild West because it's a game changer. Threadripper Pro is a game changer in terms of performance and the kinds of things that are available. And Threadripper Pro 5000 really is a next generation product that has a lot of polish and lessons learned in it from prior generation products. So the demand for it, I think, is going to be very high, even given the global situation and even given everything else, for people that depend on a lot of cores to be productive. It really does make a big difference when you have that much horsepower at your disposal. Threadripper Pro, even with overclocking, maybe is not for enthusiasts. I mean, I'm still super enthusiastic about it because I like getting work done with it, and I like for things to go fast. I like for lots of PCIe lanes, 128 PCIe lanes, and I like for 2 terabyte memory capacities, and those are nice things to have in a workstation where you're using to get things done. But those are probably not things that you are worried about if you you're just going for the hardware bought world record. Very, very nice. Oh, one other thing I'll mention. Threadripper Pro will support unregistered memory, registered memory, and registered and unregistered error correcting memory. So you can do load reduced DIMMs and registered error correcting memory and unregistered unbuffered error correcting memory. Regular memory and unregistered ECC memory, you're going to be limited to 256 gigabytes in capacity, but the load reduced DIMMs, registered, that kind of stuff will be fine. Because of the nature of Threadripper Pro, I believe, and my experience is supporting people that have Threadripper Pro 3000 CPUs over the last almost 2 years in the Level 1 forum, with Threadripper Pro systems, you definitely want to try to do the QVL, the qualified vendor list, or the known good list from Supermicro or from your motherboard vendor, or at least do a little bit of research, because different memory kits will be differently problematic. This platform is really built for DDR4 3200 registered error correcting memory. Other memory will work, but based on the post on the Level 1 forum, your mileage may vary kind of a lot, but DDR4 3200 registered error correcting, generally JEDEC timings, which is an industry standard timings, generally are going to be way less problematic on this platform than anything else. That said, you could run 3600 on it with the 5000 series Threadripper. That's one of the things that is going to come in the unlocks, but I don't have hands-on on that, and I'm not saying that you can actually do that right now. It's just a thing that's on the roadmap, a thing that may actually happen, a thing that may actually get you a few more points in benchmarks, but not a recommendation. Go for the registered error correcting memory from known good brands, especially the QVL list. Very strong caution, because this thing is going to be the thing that makes you money. If you're buying a machine like this, it's not to have fun. It's because this is your career and livelihood, and you need a fire-breathing machine in order to make the suffering of what you're doing at work a little bit more palatable. So, Threadripper Pro, let's get at that. All right, I'm Whittle, this is Level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums. If you have any questions or you're planning a build or whatever, see ya.